One of the things that I see freelance web designers struggle with the most is how to market themselves. I'm on a phone call almost weekly now with people who are great web developers, they're great web designers, but they've struggled with the idea of both finding clients and then communicating their value well enough to those potential clients that actually ends up in a sale and in a contract and with a project. That's exactly what we are talking about today with Davey Jones from Brands That Book. Him and his wife, Krista, have built an incredible web design agency, and they've served a lot of great clients and have done an amazing job. And you are going to benefit so much from what he has to say about how to market yourself as a freelance web designer. Hey, if you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe to the Self-Made Web Designer podcast and leave us a rating and some feedback. It would mean a lot to me, and it will help to shape how we do this show in the future. Without further ado, here is Davey Jones. We have an awesome guest with us here today, Mr. Davey Jones of Davey and Krista.com and the most recent development, Till Agency, which is a marketing firm that helps businesses market on social media platforms and in other ways. Just an awesome guy with a ton of good insight on what it means to brand and build a web design business, because he has done it himself with his wife really successfully. So, hey, Davey, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us today.
Thanks, man. I was pumped when you reached out. I'm glad that you're starting something, because you have so much valuable content on Self-Made Web Designer, and I think that podcasting is just such an awesome channel to disseminate content.
Yeah, thank you, man. And, my wife and I were talking about it as I started Self-Made Web Designer, and we were both like, neither of us actually read blogs.
Yeah.
Like most of the time when we're consuming content, it's because we're listening to it while we're doing the dishes,
Yep.
And so it just makes sense. And you've got a great podcast as well called Brands That Book.
Yeah, thank you. And I was fortunate enough just to be able to interview you on that. That will probably release about the same time as your podcast is being released. But that was a fun conversation. Excited for part 2 here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's get into it. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you started daveyandkrista.com and how it developed from there.
Yeah, for sure. So, but my background, I was a theology major in school. I decided after my undergrad, I was working at a high school, and the administration liked me, and they were like, "Hey, you really should consider getting your teaching certificate." And so I went into sort of a master's degree that got me a master's in multicultural education and my teaching certificate, and did that for a few years. And my wife, Krista, she had started a photography business. And so you can already see that by background, you're like, okay, so where does the web design stuff come in? But, at the time, she had started that, and I was really interested in it. I was interested more in like the business side of things. I mean, I love photography and all. And she had started that, and she was working at the time as a web designer for a nonprofit. And her background actually is in design. She her undergraduate degree is in graphic design. And then when she got this first job, it was for web design. So that's where she learned the web design piece. So we were both. So I started helping with the photography business, and so we started working on this first side hustle of ours. And eventually, she went full time with that. But to bring that business full time, she needed a website. And so she took what she learned from this first job of hers, and she was still working it, and built her first website. And so, of course, from there, people came along and were like, "Hey, who built your website? I'd love to reach out to them." And she's like, "Well, I built my website." And so other photographers, mostly other wedding industry folks, would reach out to her and just say, "Hey, could you build me a website?" And so she started this sort of side hustle, like, "Yeah, sure, I'll build your website." And at the time, I mean, since we were primarily shooting weddings, there's an off season, especially here in the Mid-Atlantic, between, let's say, late November and March, where there's just not as many weddings. And honestly, I didn't love shooting winter weddings because it got dark early and all, this and that. So it was a great form of side income during the months when we weren't shooting. So that was the sort of the beginnings of Davey and Krista. And again, my role in all of that, I was really interested in the business side of things. So while she was, sort of the artist and creative, I was interested in, okay, so how do we get more business? How do we market our business effectively? And so that's always been sort of my role, not only at within the photography business, and then Davey and Krista, but then also my newest business, Till Agency as well. So eventually, to kind of make a long story short, we helped found the Rising Tide Society, and did that for, it was probably 2 years total or so before stepping away from that. And then as we stepped away from that, we actually formally started Davey and Krista, which is a branding and website design agency. And we primarily serve service-based businesses in the creative industry, lots of wedding industry folk. Honestly, we really enjoy, though, and I think kind of our background lends itself to this, the e-commerce and more technical side of website builds. But I would say that most of our clientele are, wedding photographers or planners or, dentists, home builders, all sorts of service-based businesses.
Yeah, that's awesome. And one thing I really love about that is that, you found your niche and you serve them really well and built from there. And I think a lot of people who are just getting started as web designers have such a broad and big net that they're not catching anything.
Yeah. No, that's I think that's such a good observation. I would say, though, that a piece of advice that I give people as they're first starting out, because I do agree that it's so important to niche down, because it's just going to make your life easier on so many different levels, because you can create systems and processes that are easily repeatable, and that, and we're going to talk about this today a little bit, but marketing your business, you're just able to speak clearly to a specific set of people. But I do think it's helpful as you're getting started to work with all sorts of people, so if someone wants to work with you, work with them and see how it goes. Because, I remember even when we were starting a photography business, working with a few clients that I thought, I don't know if they're going to make the best clients for us, and really enjoying maybe that wedding. And so it might redefine kind of your perceptions and where you actually land when it comes to your niche.
So your podcast is called Brands That Book. And, one of the main things I see freelance web designers struggle with is aspects of branding themselves and following through with a sales call or being good at the business aspect. And that's really the strength that you brought to Davey and Krista. So talk a little bit about that, like things that you did that you felt like really helped the success.
Yeah, sure. So, when it comes to branding too, I guess something designers might think about and might reflect about a little bit, especially when it comes to website design. We talked a little bit about this too when you recorded on my podcast. But web design and brand design, let's say, are really two different disciplines. So I don't think that there's any shame in somebody who does web design really, really well to reach out to a brand designer and say, "Hey, can you help me? Can you help me get this right?" I think it's valuable on a few different levels, but I think an outside perspective is always super helpful for somebody from the outside looking in and saying, "Okay, so why are you doing things this way, or why did you choose kind of this aesthetic?" So I think that outside perspective can be really valuable. And again, just getting somebody who's really good at brand design to speak into your business, because brand design and website design are just, at the end of the day, they're just two different disciplines. And we've actually helped a number of brand designers with their website, because they realized as brand designers that they didn't have the technical expertise to build a well-functioning website. So I'm not sure, as a designer yourself, whether you would agree with that, but I would love to hear what you think.
No, I think that's spot on. And I think it comes back to knowing your strength and what you're good at, and then figuring out ways to complement your weaknesses. And I even saw from Krista in the Show It group the other day say, "Hey, we've got this client that's asking for this design aesthetic that we're just not good at. So does anybody want to take this? And I really appreciated that,
Yeah, and I think I think you just need to be self-aware enough to realize that, because that's not going to serve the client well, and you're going to realize that as you try, and it's not necessarily fun for us, not that everything absolutely has to be fun, but at the end of the day, if there's another designer out there whose aesthetic better matches that client's style, then it's better for those people to be connected. It's going to be a lot more enjoyable for that designer. That client is going to be a lot happier at the end of the day. You're still going to be, kind of part of that story because you were able to connect those people together, So we've got recommendations from people who we didn't even work with just because we've made connections like that. So I do think being able to define your style and understand kind of what you're good at and maybe what you're not so good at, and outsourcing or looking for help with the pieces that you're not so good at. And I think that's something that we've never been scared to ask for help or to reach out to people who might be able to help us in ways where maybe we could figure out how to do it on our own, but it's just not our expertise, or our time's better spent elsewhere. I mean, an example of that in the recent past, last year sometime, we hired Vanessa Kynes, who's a Pinterest wizard, to manage our Pinterest platform, just because, we could try to figure out that platform. We could try to figure out Tailwind and the different tools that people use on Pinterest. But we knew that just bringing somebody in who was going to be able to take that off of our plate was going to allow us to focus on things that we really are good at.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like at the heart of that is you are finding a way to serve your clients the best that you possibly can. And I think a lot of web designers really struggle with this idea that I'm being salesy or like I'm trying to manipulate somebody into hiring me. But truly, as a service provider, the only way that you're going to win long term is when you consider yourself a servant to the people that you are providing that service for.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I think it's helpful to remember that a lot of this is an iterative process. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were kind of, they're kind of in the midst of figuring out what their brand position is, and they're like, oh man, brands that book. I feel like that's just, it's short, it's to the point, it's very clear that you work with service-based businesses. And I was like, but how long it took us to come up with that, because, and especially me, I'll be the first to admit that I like to do a lot of different things, like I am just, I think of new projects almost daily, and it's been definitely something that I've had to learn how to do, to say, no, I need to focus on these projects. That sounds fun, but it's not, it's ultimately maybe not going to get me to where I want to go. So learning, just kind of figuring out what clients we are a good fit for, and then going hard after those types of people.
Yeah. And I think that process, it's trial and error and can be somewhat frustrating. And I think a lot of people come at starting a web design freelancing business with the idea that I'm going to hit it right off the bat. And if it's not a home run, then I'm just not fit for this. But failure is such a good process when it comes to building a business, and just learning as you go.
100% agree. And, I always think too, like, back to, early failures, and think to myself, like, man, I'm so glad. Because there's certain, I think, defining moments early on in anybody's business, and everybody, I don't care how long you've been in business, everybody deals with difficult clients once in a while, or just difficult situations, So if you are out there and you're just getting started and you're looking at somebody else's business that you kind of emulate, know that even if things look really, really, really good on the outside, that doesn't mean that they're not really good, but know that they also deal with difficult situations, and they have problems to solve, and it's just a matter of learning from them and then moving on and making the appropriate adjustments. But it's a very iterative process. Even in language that we used to try to do I'm trying to remember like kind of our first sort of tagline, brand positioning statement, but it was something along the lines of converting, like brands that convert or something like that. And with our audience, just there was something about the word convert that maybe sounded a little bit too technical or just didn't resonate, but for service-based businesses, booking makes a lot of sense, right? Everybody's trying to book more clients. But it's not like it's not like day one we came up with that. And then, we were golden. It was a lot of, figuring out, okay, well, this messaging for whatever reason isn't really landing. And, what can we do maybe to improve it, make it a little bit more clear, and just more definitively or more specifically speak to a group of people.
My first tagline when I first got started was ridding the world of bad websites, one web design at a time. It's just so cheesy and stupid.
Yeah, but you start there and you move on. I can't tell you. I mean, if we go back, so for instance, like right when we stepped down from the Rising Tide Society and we launched the first iteration of our website for Davey and Krista, I'm sure that if you do the Wayback Machine, are you familiar with the Wayback Machine? Yeah, so absolutely. I'm sure you can find it. I wish that didn't exist, but for anybody who wants to go look at iterations of our website, I mean, it's a far cry from what it is today. And I remember when we launched, like I said, I love to do lots of different things. I love copywriting. I love coaching. I love web design and branding. I mean, I love all of the things, especially when it comes to just the online world and digital marketing. And so when we launched with probably 5 different services. And so, and it just didn't land well. And, I think in part because when people talked about Davey and Krista, and what Davey and Krista did, there was just too much to get it. Oh, Davey and Krista. Yeah, I think they do, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, right? If you go to our website right now, I would hope at least, and I think it does, very much you understand, like when you land on our website that we're brand and website designers. That's what we do. We might provide content around all sorts of different things, but at the end of the day, if you need a new brand or a rebrand or a new website design, that's what we do.
What I love about that is that there's streamlined clarity to who you serve and how you serve them. And I think so many service providers or freelance web designers can get really cute about what it is that they do. And somebody comes and visits their website and they're like, I don't even really know what I'm getting myself into because they haven't been clear about who they are and what they do.
Yeah. And, if you have a tagline that maybe, if you had like Brands That Book, for instance, Brands That Book even requires a little extra explanation, from the tagline Brands That Book, you don't necessarily know that we're brand designers or website designers. So if you go to our website, you see that we provide that little bit of elaboration, and I would 100% agree though. One of the things that, because we're working with a lot of photographers, we notice that people have like a cute, sort of positioning statement or some sort of cute statement on their, on the homepage of their website, but it doesn't include but nowhere on their homepage can you find, okay, where they're located and what kind of photography they do, So you don't want to bury, that sort of information that's key to people understanding whether they're in the right place, somewhere on your website that people can't see it.
So you just recently pivoted and started the Till Agency. And I'd love for you to talk about that and what that process looked like going into unknown territory for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Till Agency is, it's a paid advertising agency. So, primarily what we're doing is we're running Facebook and Instagram ads for companies, a little bit of Google ads. And then for those clients, we do all sorts of things, So again, just going back to like clarifying what it is that you do. With Till Agency, we want to be as full service as possible. But again, we don't want to fall into that trap. Like we want people, when they describe the Till Agency, to understand that it's an advertising agency. Now, when they're in the door, we offer all sorts of other services. We do search engine optimization. We do cart value optimization. We look at people's email funnels, and we'll even get in there and do a little bit of writing when it comes to those funnels. So there's all sorts of different things that we do, but we want to just be super clear about what that is. And Till's been a lot of fun to build because I've had all sorts of failed projects in the past, so don't think that just because you've built one successful business that that anything you touch after that is just automatically going to work. I think that's just one of the pieces, something that I learned along the way in pursuing other projects, that once you get a business going and sort of the flywheel's going, so there's a little bit of momentum. Sometimes I think it's easy to forget, how much of a grind it is and how much of a hustle it is in the beginning. With Till, there's been late nights, and it's all fine and good. I think, especially when people are giving advice to others about starting a business, and they'll talk about boundaries and, hey, you want to make sure you set designated work hours, and you want to make sure that you're not answering emails on, in the evenings or on the weekends and stuff like that. I think there is sort of, this period of time, especially when you're starting a business, that you just got to hustle, and if that means sending some emails later at night, or doing some work later at night, or getting up on a Saturday morning early before your kids get up and getting some work done, you just got to go do it.
I think right now in business, there's these two camps. You've got your Michael Hyatt, who is just like, if you're working over 40 hours a week, then you're probably doing something wrong. And then you've got your Gary Vee, who's like, if you're working under 80 hours a week, then you're definitely doing something wrong, And so there's this tension right now. And for me, like, I look at things in seasons, so and my wife and I do this as well. As I've launched Self-Made Web Designer, we've realized, like, okay, I'm going to have to stop doing freelancing, which means it's going to take a hit on our income. And I'm really going to have to pour myself into this. And so we work those things out as far as responsibilities in the home, like, okay, you're going to pick up the kids. I'm going to go to Starbucks and I'm going to type out some content, So talk about that with you and Krista. Like, how have you guys balance that and figured out how to do things in seasons? Because you also have kids, like, you've also got all of these other things going on.
Yeah, I think thinking about it in seasons is super helpful, because especially right now, Till is really ramped up, probably a little bit faster than what me and my partners had anticipated. And then Davey and Krista is, a full-fledged branding and website design agency. So this season for me right now is particularly busy. We have a 20-month-old, which it's hard to believe. That's a whole nother conversation. How it really is true. People would tell me, "Oh, it goes by so quick." Turns out it does go by so quick. But it's helpful to think about things in seasons, because I think this season that we're in right now, it's important for Krista and I have that conversation and say, this season can't last forever. Like this rhythm of work that I have right now, that's a little bit more than usual. We're going to have to figure out a schedule and figure out boundaries for it. But this season kind of calls for that extra effort right now, especially as we establish a new business. And so Krista realizes that. And then we just, we make sure that we keep our commitments to one another. And I think that, I just think working with a spouse, but working with anybody, that's important. So, there's certain times of the day where, like, I need to be disconnected. I need to be off my phone. I need to be, not checking email, and I need to be hanging out with the family. Certainly, like, while we're eating dinner and that time leading up, to bedtime for Jack. And, I just got to make sure that I'm being there for him and being a good father. And then when he goes down to for bed, I can, turn the laptop back on and make sure that client projects are moving.
Similar to what we have with me and Sarah, because we've got a brand new baby. And so it's not quite as, sectionized as that, because I'll have to, like, I joked with somebody the other day that it's like, type, get up and change the diaper, type, give them a bottle, type, get food ready for the rest of my kiddos. So I think it's just figuring out how to make it work, but not allowing your circumstance to keep you from getting to the point that you want to get to.
Yeah, for sure. And it's with kids, especially with you being in the season, the newborn season right now. And congrats, by the way. it's crazy. I mean, like at one day they have like 3 naps, and then all of a sudden, as soon as you get used to the 3 or 5 naps or however many naps they take when they're newborns, all of a sudden they go down to 3, let's say, and then all of a sudden, as soon as you get used to that, they go down to 2, and then as soon as you get used to that, they go down to 1, and so it's just such an adjustment. And just giving yourself the grace and flexibility, I guess, to try to figure that out, But admittedly, it's still something I'm sorting out. So, for instance, Jack's been under the weather the last 2 days, so that's kind of thrown off our morning schedule and time that I usually get to work. I've been hanging out with him, right? So yeah, I mean, not to take the conversation in a whole nother direction, but it's definitely. Working from home is great. I do feel super fortunate that I get, the flexibility that owning your own business has. But there's definitely challenges with it too.
So talk a little bit about first getting started. So let's say you have a freelance web designer that is just getting started on a coaching call. What would you encourage them to do in their first steps, maybe even their first 6 months of getting going?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question. And really, I think that marketing, sales, getting your name out there, getting more visibility, getting more work, it really comes down to 2 things. All right. It comes down to building relationships and building content. And that's really, that's really it. And I think it's just so important, especially when you're first getting started with something. And this is something, there's a few things with Till that I feel like we did really well just as we got started, which was letting everybody know in our network what we were doing. We didn't build a website and then hope people that would just miraculously find it, right? We sent emails to everybody that we knew in our networks and said, it was pretty simple. It just said, hey, listen, this is what we just started this new business. We reference a little bit of success that we've had. And again, when you're just getting started, like that might be like just a free project that you did for somebody or something that you did for yourself, So I think one of the best things that you could probably do as a website designer, like you can build a website for yourself and you can reference that when you tell your network what you're doing. Like, hey, I'm doing website design now. If you want to check out something that I've done, here's a link to that. If you know of anybody who might be interested in a new website or a website redesign, have them reach out. Also, if you're ever interested in a website, let me know. I'd be happy to help you. And that's a great way just to tap into relationships that you already have to try to find like an initial set of work.
And you mentioned building content and content marketing. And I think that's a real key component to being successful for the long term. And I don't think a lot of freelancers realize that. Most get caught up in the feast or famine mentality. Mm-hmm. Like they either have too much work to do and not enough time, or they have no work and they're scrambling to find it. But you really have to be intentional about what you're putting out and how you're marketing yourself, either with a blog or with videos or with how-tos. So talk about how you guys, because y'all have done it incredibly well at Davey and Krista, like so much great content to help your clients. So talk about that, how you've done both, how you've been able to build projects, but actually like build content at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is sort of my wheelhouse. I mean, if you go to Davey and Krista and you check out some of our projects and our design, nearly all the credit is due to Krista. She's the designer, and then I would consider myself the marketer of the two of us. But both relationships and content. And one thing that you said about content that I think is super beneficial to point out, content's not just blog content. I think a lot of people, when they think of content, they think, oh, I got to be blogging. And if you're not a good writer, then that's okay, because there's all sorts of great channels that you can create content on. You can push content on, audio. So you can do a podcast like this. You can create a YouTube channel. So it's not just written blog content. Now, if you can teach yourself to or if you can become a better writer, because as we talked about on my podcast, something that you said is nobody's born, nobody's born a good writer. People become a good writer after just doing it over and over again. And I do think that there's value in actually creating, written blog posts, even if you then turn that into a video or whatever. But I guess that's probably a conversation for another day. The point being is that choose some sort of channel that you want to create content on. Having a website where you can post that content is, I think, really valuable because it's a channel that you actually own. Like your website, you own that. If Facebook were to go down tomorrow, or YouTube were to go down tomorrow, and of course those things are very unlikely, but you lose the content there, right? So having that content somewhere on your website, I think is pretty valuable. And then there's always fluke things that happen, right? Maybe YouTube or Facebook bans you unintentionally, and those things occasionally do happen, right? Then you're just not out of luck. So choose a place that you're going to produce content. And then really at the end of the day, all content is information that helps someone reach their goal or meet a need. And like I mentioned relationships as one of the most valuable things you can do in building, in building a business is building relationships. One of the best ways to build relationships is to create free content. All right. And that free content establishes trust. It builds authority, because it allows you to serve people. Every day we get questions from people. And I assume that you do too, Chris, when it comes to website design. People want to know, what platform should I build on? People want to know, should I have a single page site or a multi-page site? There's a bajillion questions that people ask. And then oftentimes you'll find that people are asking the same questions over and over and over again. Keep a list of that kind of stuff and then start creating content around it. Most of the blog posts that we push out over at daveyandkrista.com, they're the result of us being asked that question 10 times and thinking to ourselves, we should just create a blog post around that.
Something you said that really hit home to me was content is helping someone reach their goal or meet a need. And I think this is a key thing to understand when it comes to getting clients as a freelance web designer, that you can't think of yourself as this artist who's trying to puff your portfolio. You have to think of yourself of how am I going to help this person reach their goals or reach the vision that they're seeing for their future. And it becomes a lot less about you and a lot more about them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that when you have that mentality about content, you'll see that it pays off in all sorts of different ways. Even when you think about search engine optimization, and this is why I don't talk about channels often when I talk about content. Like, I don't think it's so important that you absolutely have to be on Instagram or you have to be on Facebook, you have to be on Twitter. If you go to Till Agency right now, we've built a business. And we have not launched yet our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, there's no social media posts. Now, don't get me wrong. That is on our list of things to do this year. Actually, in the very near future, we have our designer over at Till, working on getting all that stuff together. But it's not, that's not the important thing. The important thing is that we have content that proves out that we can help people get to where they want to go. So content for us over at Till Agency looks a little bit different than the content we provide over at Davey and Krista. So, I guess just to distinguish between the two, content over at Davey and Krista is going to be a lot of tutorials. It's going to be a lot of just advice for people who are trying to do it themselves. We do work with, smaller businesses, solopreneurs, small teams. And so there is a certain aspect of people go to that blog to figure out how to do something on their own, and along the way, it allows us to prove that we're really good at what we do, So if you're kind of over the stage of building a website on your own, you can hire us to build that website for you. But we have website templates available for people that they can download and customize themselves. Till Agency is a little bit different. We have a different sort of client over there, but it's still just as important for us to build content. But the content that we build over at Till Agency is in the way of case studies. So we put together case studies of people that we've helped. So we outline kind of what the problem it is that they had, and then where they wanted to go. And then we talk about the ways in which we partner with that company to help them get to where they want to go. And again, people could read these case studies. People could jump on a call with me over at Till Agency, take what I tell them and just try to go implement it on their own. But these are the type of people who are like, who realize, their time would be better spent doing what they're good at, and it's better to hire an agency to help them.
And that's great, because I think a lot of people that are even potentially thinking about getting into web design are worried that, sites like Showit or Webflow or Elementor on WordPress are going to eventually take their business away from them. And so there's this fear of like, if I give this away, nobody's going to want to hire me. But I feel like you guys have seen the opposite of that.
Yeah. And the exact opposite is true. I mean, and I have a few coaching clients that, and that will come up occasionally. And, they'll say, well, am I giving too much away? Especially when they're putting together things like lead magnets and stuff like that. And so a lead magnet is just typically something that somebody can download on your website. And in exchange, you get their email address so you can follow up with them. And so one thing that I'll hear often is like, hey, am I giving away too much in this lead magnet? And I'm like, if you don't feel like you're not giving away too much, then you're not doing it right. All right. Like, you should feel every time you write a blog post that, man, I gave away the good stuff in this post. I gave away the good stuff in this video. And that's really what's going to prove to people that you're an expert and that you can be trusted. I think it was, what's his name? He wrote, Tim Ferriss, right? Wrote the 4-Hour Workweek. He also wrote a bunch of like, kind of follow-ups to that. I'm thinking of Tools of Titans is one of his books.
Yeah, great book.
I think in that he mentioned something, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but he said something along the lines of like, the people who are truly good at what they do, make things seem easy or teach things in a way that they're easy to understand. It was something along those lines, right? But when you're hanging out, like when you have a teacher who really knows their stuff, then they have a way of like transferring that knowledge in a way that just, it just seems so easy all of a sudden. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be as good as your teacher in what you do. But I really do think that's the sign of an expert. I think the people who try to make things more convoluted or complicated than they really are people who aren't truly experts in what they're doing, or just aren't secure enough in what they're doing. So I say, give it away. And I wouldn't be worried about, Showit or these platforms making things too easy, because website design, it's a discipline, and anybody can build their own website, but we have people who've built their own websites come to us and just say, hey, I know that I know I need an expert to help me with this at this point. There's just so many things that go into it that maybe when you're doing website design every day just come naturally to you at this point. But just like the user experience, how color, there's just so many different things that come to or that come into play in website design that the average person would miss, or somebody who's not trained in website design or has been doing it for a while would likely miss. Again, just go back to the photography example, just because we work with a lot of photographers. Occasionally we will get a question. It's like, hey, why should I pay you to build a website for me when I can just download a template off your website? And it's, of course, much more inexpensive to do that. And, it would be like me saying, okay, why can't I just ask all my friends at my wedding to take iPhone photos of me instead of hiring a photographer who's going to cost thousands of dollars? Because it doesn't matter. If you give an average person a camera, they're still not going to produce the same quality photos that a Katie Mary or a Jonathan Canlis or, somebody who is an expert in their craft.
You recently did a talk at the United Conference that I just absolutely loved, and you talked about the best way to set up your own personal website to get the clients that you are actually trying to get. I wonder if you could just give us maybe a few bullet points from that conversation. And if I'm putting you on the spot and you've got to get notes, just let me know.
No.
But I just felt like I felt like it was so valuable and such a good resource for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the thesis of that talk, and I can send you it. I mean, you probably have access to the link for that. So if you want to post that in show notes and people want to take a look at that, they can go and see the full talk. But basically, my thesis in that talk is that, whenever somebody comes to your website, or really whenever somebody interacts with you, so these concepts are as true on your website as they are anywhere else you show up to do business. But people want to know, one, are you good at what you do? All right. So of course that's of course people want to know that. They want to know, are you good at what you do? And then the second thing people want to know is, can you really do that, whatever that service is that you provide, for someone like them? All right. Can you really do whatever that service that you provide for somebody like them? Can you really get them the results that you've gotten other people? Can you really get them the results that they've kind of determined are important to them? And so what that comes down to, I think really focusing on those two questions makes selling and marketing a lot easier. And it also, again, pointing back to what I said earlier, it points back to why relationships and why creating content are so important. So when people go to your website, it's important, one, to show off your best work. Your best work, not all your work, your very best work. You want, when people go to your website, you want them to understand almost immediately what it is, who you do it for, and how good your work is. So again, I know I'm not speaking to photographers here, but if you were a photographer, you'd want your very best images in the hero spot of your website. If you're a web designer, you want to make sure that if you have designed a couple websites, that you're showing off your very best websites, pretty much right away, somewhere on your website. So you're demonstrating that you're good at what you do. But it's not good enough just to say that you're good at what you do. You want other people to be saying that you're good at what you do as well. So throughout your website, you should be using things like social proof. You should have testimonials from clients who are saying, hey, Davey, Chris, whoever really got me to where I wanted to go. I had these goals, and Davey and Chris, they helped me get there. And so that's the kind of stuff that you want to include throughout your website. And of course, in the United Talk, I go into much more detail, and I look at each of the pages and talk about, sort of what the theme of each of those pages is. But really, at the end of the day, what it comes down to is building relationships, because, in building those relationships, you're going to have other people who are pointing back at you and saying, hey, he really is good at what he does. And then creating content, because creating content, like I said, not only is it one of the best ways to build relationships, but it's also a way to establish that you have authority and establish trust with people when you actually make the claim that you can do whatever it is that you say you can do.
The cool thing about that too is you actually end up learning a ton from having to teach it as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's this big, there's a lot of thought right now in the UX design world about how if you're a UX designer, you should also be a UX writer, because you will grow exponentially from that experience.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think that, thinking back to my days as a teacher, one of the things I realized real quickly, like day one of class, was, I would show up and I would think to myself, I know this material. But then getting up in front of the class and then trying to teach it and realizing, okay, maybe I don't know this material as well as I thought I knew it. And then having to go back and study it a little bit harder. But then also, even as I progressed in teaching, realizing that, typically there are 3 or 4 periods in a day, right? The third period that I had to teach that class, that was the best lesson, right? Because you've articulated it at least 2 other times before that, and you've also answered questions that people have. And again, this is, I think, just along the lines of creating content and putting content out there, is people are going to ask questions and they're going to push back. And that's going to force you, one, to think through things that you hadn't thought of before, and two, kind of reevaluate your own claims and either shift them, because, hey, that person brought up a good point, and I need to adjust my content to kind of account for that question or that outlier. So, again, just I think that's a great insight.
Yeah. So what about that when people push back? Because somebody hearing that might think, oh no, if I get questioned, I'm not going to be considered the expert, and somebody might not be as willing to hire me. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of those things, like just being secure in what you do and what your expertise is, and I appreciate it when people ask questions, because it often makes me think about things that I hadn't thought of before. I think that there's a few things that you should, I guess, sort of be aware of, because I think some people are they're too quick to say, oh yeah, that's a good point, and then just kind of take the I'm wrong position. And I think it's okay to, if somebody pushes back and it's something that you hadn't thought about before and you're not quite sure what the answer is, to say, hey, I just need a little bit of time to think about that, but there's certainly not anything wrong in going back to somebody and saying, hey, I thought about what you said. I think you make a good point, and let's give that a shot, especially in the context of a project. And, for both Till and Davey and Krista, we have to do that on I think on almost every project basis, because the people that we're working with, they also have an expertise as well. And so they're also going to know their audience and their goals, even better than we are. So of course, we're going to take the certain principles that we think can apply to every business, but rules might bend based on, that person's audience. So we might write copy, for instance, over at Till Agency for an ad for a company, and that company might come back and say, hey, listen, we need to make these adjustments to the copy. And, your gut reaction might be, well, no, typically people respond to this sort of claim in this way, right? But after further reflection, you might think, no, it looks like they've tried something like this in the past and it didn't land. So, we're gonna work with them to make this adjustment. And I think people really respect that. Kind of going back to what you said in the very beginning of this episode, you're here to serve people and you're here to help them get to where they want to go. And so it really is a fine line between, not bending too much, because you know your craft, and that there's certain things that might not be obvious to that person, but will help them get to where they want to go. But then also being flexible enough to take into account their feedback and their criticism occasionally.
And I think to a certain extent, it's about not getting caught up in the weeds. Not getting so single focused about the role that you play or the bigger picture of what it is that you're doing to serve your client. Whereas you have this aspect of, I'm going to build them a website, or I'm going to do some web designs for them, but they're thinking, but yeah, what about advertising? What about payroll? What about, all the marketing stuff? And so coming at it humbly, but with expertise, is that that sweet spot for a web designer to know, like, hey, I'm confident to be right and I'm confident to be wrong, but it doesn't decrease my value to whoever it is that I'm serving.
Yeah, I think that's a great approach, and it's just something that. When we have clients occasionally who will come to us and say, this is what I want. And we tell them, like, hey, we think that this is a bad move, and sometimes it ends up being a bad move, but the client wants it. And so at the end of the day, you're there to build their website, for them. And so, I think it's important to make that claim, to say, hey, we do think that this is a bad idea. But if they insist, you go ahead and do it. But at least it's out there. And I think that you, whether they realize it or not, have served them well by bringing, whatever that concern is up, getting it in writing in an email, somewhere, just in case they do come back one day and kind of forget that you did try to convince them to do something different. But also realize that that's just part of projects. I think we're building a house right now. And, it's funny, I think kind of trying to put myself in our builders' shoes, and I do feel like there's so many similarities to website design. There's obviously a ton of differences too, but trying to remember, trying to really take, like if we go to our builder and say we want, XYZ, and him saying, hey, listen, I really think you're going to regret this one day, really thinking hard about that, because I can see ourselves, talking to a website design client saying the exact same thing.
Well, Davey, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Can you please tell our listeners how they might be able to find you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So till.agency, that's the latest business, paid advertising, Facebook and Instagram ads, helping businesses scale. If you go over to daveyandkrista.com, you're going to find the brand and website design agency. And over there, I think that while most of the content is written towards it's not written with website designers in mind, I do think that there's probably a decent amount of content over there if you're just starting your business, especially that you might find helpful, because we do write, for instance, those, how to deal with difficult client posts, which I think pretty much could apply to any sort of business as well, and DIY design mistakes, stuff like that just somebody who's just getting started in website design might find helpful. And then you can always connect with us on Instagram. My personal Instagram is at Davey T. Jonesy, but you can find the both of us, Davey and Krista, over at Davey and Krista.
Awesome. And of course, Brands That Book podcast. And thank you so much for having me on there as well. It's just a great resource for anybody that has a service-based business.
Thanks. And likewise, really appreciate you having me on the podcast. Excited for this thing to launch. And, if you are listening, go ahead and check out my Brands That Book episode with Chris.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're definitely going to have you back on, Davey. This has been such a great conversation.
Thanks, Chris. Really appreciate it.
Wow, such incredible insight from Davey. I know I've learned a lot from him, and I'm definitely going to have him back on the show so that he can tell us more about how to market ourselves as freelance web designers. There's actually quite a few places that you can find Davey at. He has his own podcast. It's incredible, called Brands That Book. I was actually a guest on it, had a great time talking to him. Him and his wife, Krista, run daveyandkrista.com. You can see how they've set up their web design business, how they sell templates for Showit and WordPress as well. And then you can also find him at till.agency for some of his advertising work that he's begun to do. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I hope that you enjoyed the first 4 episodes of the Self-Made Web Designer podcast. We will be back next Tuesday with a brand new episode, and I know that you're going to benefit from it. I know that you're going to enjoy it. I can't wait to see you then.